The auditorium was dimly lit, the smell of old wood and polished brass lingering in the air. Emily sat at the grand piano, her fingers gliding gently over the keys. The soft, haunting notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the empty space, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She always felt safe here at night, away from the pressure of her father's company and the constant watchful eyes of the staff. Music was her escape, the only place where she could breathe freely. She didn't notice the heavy oak doors swinging open until the faint sound of leather shoes echoed across the marble floor. Her heart jumped, and she froze mid-note. The melody hung in the air for a second before fading into silence. A tall figure stepped forward, the light from the ceiling catching the sharp lines of his face. Raymond Kessler, her father, the most feared CEO in the city, stood there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's Chopin, isn't it?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with something darker. Emily swallowed hard, nodding. She had always known her father didn't approve of her spending time on music, but she never expected what came next. He walked closer, the sound of his shoes slow and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock before it strikes midnight. "If you play that again," he said softly, "I'll kill your mother. Or maybe I'll kill you. You choose which you prefer." His smile never wavered, as if he were discussing something as casual as the weather. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, trying to understand if he was joking, but there was no humor in his eyes. They were cold, calculated, and utterly serious. She felt the blood drain from her face, her hands still resting on the piano keys. She wanted to speak, to ask why, but her voice refused to come out. Raymond leaned slightly closer, his shadow falling over her like a curtain of darkness. "Do you understand me?" he asked. She nodded quickly, afraid to do anything else. His smile widened just a fraction, as if he was pleased by her fear. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs. The piano felt colder now, the music inside her smothered by the weight of his threat. She slowly gathered her sheet music, her hands shaking. But in her panic, one page slipped from her folder and floated to the floor. She didn't notice it. She was too focused on getting out of the room. In the far corner of the auditorium, a man stood in the shadows, holding a mop. Marcus, the janitor, had been cleaning quietly for the past hour. He had seen many strange things in his years working here, but this was different. He had heard every word, the threat hanging in the air, like smoke after a fire. Marcus bent down and picked up the fallen sheet. He recognized the title immediately, Nocturne in E-flat major, Opera 9, number 2. His late wife used to play it for him every evening, and hearing even a few notes always stirred something deep in his chest. But now the music felt tied to something darker, heavier. He watched Emily leave, her shoulders hunched, her steps hurried. She didn't look back. The heavy doors closed behind her, leaving Marcus alone in the vast, silent space. He looked at the sheet of music in his hand, then toward the piano. Slowly he approached it, running his fingers along its smooth, polished surface. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Raymond had spoken to her, not like a father, but like a man delivering a death sentence. Marcus had seen that kind of cruelty before, growing up in a part of town where power and fear often walked hand in hand. It never sat right with him then, and it didn't now. He set the sheet music gently on the piano bench, as if it were something fragile. His mind was already racing. He knew the risk of getting involved. People like Raymond Kessler didn't forgive, and they didn't forget. But there was something about the fear in Emily's eyes that night, something that stirred an old fire in him. The silence in the auditorium felt heavier now. Marcus took one last look at the piano before picking up his mop and walking out. He didn't know yet what he was going to do, but he knew he couldn't just pretend he hadn't heard what happened. Somewhere deep down, a decision was already forming, even if he couldn't name it yet. Emily, meanwhile, walked quickly through the dim hallways of the building, her father's words still ringing in her ears. She clutched her music folder to her chest, feeling like every shadow held danger. When she finally reached her car, she locked the doors and sat in silence for a long moment, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her father had always been controlling, but this was different. This was a threat that reached into the core of her life, the one place she felt free. Now, even her music wasn't safe. She thought of her mother, sitting at home, unaware of the knife edge her daughter now balanced on. She turned the key, the car's engine humming to life. As she drove away, she didn't notice the lone window light still shining in the top floor of the building, her father's office, where he stood, looking down at the parking lot, watching her leave. His expression was unreadable, but the faint curve of his lips suggested he believed the matter was settled. Neither of them knew that someone else had been there. Someone who wasn't afraid of the CEO's smile or his threats. Someone who had nothing to lose and perhaps everything to gain by stepping in. Marcus had been working in that building for more than 15 years. Every floor, every corner, every squeaky door hinge was familiar to him. He was the man no one really noticed, the one pushing the mop when important people walked by, the one emptying trash cans while others gave big speeches. People talked around him as if he wasn't there, forgetting that ears can hear even when no one is looking. That night, after Emily had left the auditorium in a rush, Marcus stayed behind, leaning on his mop for a moment. The echo of her music still lingered in his head. Chopin's Nocturne wasn't just another piece of music to him. It was a memory. His late wife, Clara, had loved playing it. She would sit at their old upright piano every Sunday morning, the sunlight falling across her hands, and play that same soft melody until he almost forgot the world outside. Clara had been gone for over a decade, but that song always pulled her back into his mind like a ghost that never aged. Now that same music was tied to something new, something ugly. He had watched the way Emily's face changed when her father threatened her. It was like watching a flame get snuffed out by a sudden wind. She had been alive when she played those first notes, but afterward, she moved like a shadow of herself. Marcus walked over to the piano and noticed the sheet music she had left behind. He picked it up carefully as if it might crumble in his hands. The title sat at the top in bold letters, Nocturne in E-flat major, Opera 9, number 2. He traced the name with his thumb, his chest tightening. He knew he wasn't supposed to get involved in the business of the people upstairs. The CEO, Raymond Kessler, was not a man who forgave trespasses. Marcus had seen him fire senior executives for the smallest mistakes, humiliate employees in front of entire teams, and make security escort people out like criminals for reasons no one ever understood. If the man could treat his top-level staff like that, Marcus could only imagine what he might do to a janitor who stepped out of line. Still, something about the whole thing wouldn't leave Marcus alone. He had seen a lot in his life: poverty, street fights, nights where you slept with one eye open. But threats like that, against your own blood, that was another kind of cold. It stuck to him like a smell he couldn't wash off. The rest of his shift went by in a blur. He swept the hallways, emptied trash bins, and wiped down glass doors, but his mind kept going back to the moment in the auditorium. He could still hear Raymond's voice, low and almost casual, like he wasn't talking about murder, but about the weather. He could still see Emily's hands shaking when she gathered her things. Later, when he walked past the staff lounge, a couple of office assistants were whispering over coffee. They didn't know Marcus was in earshot. "You know the boss doesn't let his daughter perform outside approved events, right?" one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "I heard he once canceled her entire recital because she played a piece he didn't like." Marcus paused just out of view, their words adding to the puzzle. When he finally clocked out and stepped into the cool night air, he stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking up at the tall glass tower of the building. The top floors still had a few lights on. One of them was the CEO's office. Marcus could almost picture the man sitting there with a drink in his hand, satisfied that his daughter would obey. On the bus ride home, Marcus kept the sheet music folded carefully in his jacket pocket. He wasn't sure why he had taken it. Maybe it was because it felt wrong to leave it lying there. Maybe it was because holding it gave him a piece of his wife back for a little while. Or maybe it was because some part of him knew that this wasn't over yet, that somehow this music was going to matter. He reached his small apartment, a one-bedroom place with peeling paint and a couch that sagged in the middle. He set the sheet music on his table and stared at it for a long time. The quiet of his home was different from the quiet of the auditorium. Here, It was the kind of silence that made you think about things you'd rather not remember. He thought about Clara's hands, about the warm afternoons when life was simpler, and about how Emily's eyes had looked, full of fear, but also something else, something like hunger for freedom. Marcus had always told himself to keep his head down, to do his job, to go home, and to not stick his nose into the affairs of people with more power than he could dream of. That's how he'd survived this long. But as he sat there staring at those musical notes, he felt a weight in his chest. Some rules weren't meant to be followed forever. He tried to sleep, but the memory of the CEO's words kept him awake. The idea that a father could threaten his own daughter over a song made him angry in a way he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about Emily, it was about anyone who'd ever been told to give up the one thing that made them feel alive. When the sun began to rise, Marcus made himself a cup of coffee and looked at the sheet music again. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just let this be another story he overheard and then forgot. Somewhere deep inside, the decision was already taking shape, and when it was ready, there would be no turning back. For the next several nights, Marcus noticed a change in Emily's routine. She still came to the auditorium, but her music was different now. Gone were the flowing, emotional pieces she used to play. Instead, she stuck to safe, rigid tunes, pieces without the softness and soul of Chopin. The music sounded empty, like someone speaking words they didn't believe in. Marcus would arrive early to clean the upper floors so he could end his shift in the auditorium. He never told Emily he was there, but he kept to the shadows, quietly working in the far corner while she practiced. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would pause mid-song, her fingers hovering above the keys, and her eyes would drift toward the sheet music stand, as if she was imagining playing something else. But then she would shake her head, force a smile to herself, and go back to the lifeless notes. It pained Marcus to watch her this way. Music was supposed to be freedom. He knew that for certain because he had seen it in Clara's eyes every time she played. Back then, the sound of a piano was like a window opening to the outside world. But now, Emily's piano was a prison, and her father held the key. On the fourth night after the threat, Marcus made a choice. He walked a little closer to the stage while sweeping, close enough for her to notice him. Emily looked up briefly, but didn't say anything. Her eyes looked tired, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. He stayed near the side, listening. When she finished the piece, Marcus spoke quietly, his voice low enough that it wouldn't echo. "Music isn't music if you play it in fear." Emily froze. For a second, her expression was unreadable, half surprised, half cautious. I I just like to play," she said finally, as if brushing off his words. But Marcus could hear the hesitation. He didn't push further. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was the copy of Chopin's Nocturne he had taken from the floor that night. He placed it on the piano bench without saying a word. Emily's eyes widened slightly when she saw it. She stared at the paper for a long moment, her fingers twitching like they wanted to touch it. She even placed her hands on the first few keys, testing the sound. But then she pulled away, her shoulders stiffening. She picked up the sheet, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her bag without playing a single note from it. Marcus didn't take it personally. He knew fear didn't go away just because someone gave you permission to be brave. It had to grow slowly, like a seed planted in the dark. That night, after she left, Marcus stayed behind. He walked up to the piano and gently pressed a single note from the nocturne, letting it ring out into the empty auditorium. It brought back the sound of Clara's laughter, warmth of her hands, the comfort of knowing someone was happy just to share the room with him. He wished Emily could have that same feeling without looking over her shoulder. The following evening, Marcus kept his distance again. He didn't want to scare her away or make her feel like he was interfering. But as the week went on, he noticed small changes. Emily would sometimes linger a few minutes after practice, her hands resting on the keys like she was thinking of something she couldn't quite bring herself to do. She no longer looked completely numb, more like she was holding something back. Marcus began to wonder if maybe she was playing the nocturne when no one else was around, late at night in her own home, away from her father's eyes. The thought gave him a quiet sense of hope. He knew what it was like to hide the things you loved just to keep them safe. But the risk for Emily was greater. This wasn't just about music, it was about power. Her father didn't see her piano playing as a harmless hobby. He saw it as defiance, and in his world, defiance was a threat. One Friday night, as Marcus finished mopping the stage, he heard the faint sound of someone walking in. Emily stepped inside, looking around the auditorium as if checking for anyone else. Marcus kept his head down, pretending to focus on his work. She sat at the piano, opened her bag, and pulled out the folded Chopin sheet. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then, almost too softly to hear, she began to play. The first notes were hesitant, shaky, but they carried the unmistakable beauty of the nocturne. Marcus froze, holding his breath so he wouldn't make a sound. She played the first few measures before stopping suddenly, her head snapping toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in. No one came. She quickly shoved the sheet back into her bag and switched to another piece, one of her father's approved selections. It was as if the moment of rebellion had never happened. Marcus said nothing, but inside he felt the weight of the choice she had made in those few seconds. She had played the music she loved, even if only for a heartbeat. That meant the seed was growing. He knew then that it was only a matter of time before something would happen, before she would either stop hiding or be caught. And if the second happened, he wasn't sure what Raymond Kessler might do. But Marcus also knew one more thing. If it came to that, he would be there. He didn't know how yet, but he couldn't stand by and watch someone's light be extinguished the way he had once seen happen to Clara's dreams. As he turned off the stage lights that night, Marcus looked at the piano one last time. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a battlefield, and every note played in defiance was a shot fired. Emily might not realize it yet, but the fight had already begun. The next night, the auditorium was even quieter than usual. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Emily sat at the piano, playing a slow, careful piece from her father's approved list. The notes were correct, the timing perfect, but there was no feeling in them. It was like watching someone walk through a beautiful garden without looking at the flowers. Marcus was sweeping near the far wall, moving slowly so he could listen. He had been thinking all day about whether or not to speak to her again. The first time he had said something, she hadn't gotten angry, but she had been cautious. He knew that trust wasn't something you could demand. It had to be earned. Still, he couldn't watch her smother her music night after night without trying again. When she finished the piece, Marcus leaned his broom against the wall and walked toward the stage. His steps were slow and quiet. Emily noticed him and straightened in her seat, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. "You play well," Marcus said, his voice low and calm, "but I've heard you play better." She looked at him, confused. "Better? Better?" he repeated. "When you believe in the music, when it means something to you." He paused, watching her face. "Music isn't music if you're playing in fear." Emily's hands curled into her lap. She didn't answer right away. He could see her eyes shift slightly, as if she was deciding how much to say. "Sometimes you don't get to choose what you play," she said finally. "That's true," Marcus agreed, "but you always get to choose why you play." For a moment, the silence between them was louder than any sound. Marcus reached into the large pocket of his work apron and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He placed it gently on the piano bench. It was the same Chopin nocturne she had left behind the night her father threatened her. Emily's eyes went wide when she recognized it. She hesitated, glancing toward the auditorium doors, then back at Marcus. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Marcus took a small step back. "I think you should keep it," he said. She looked down at the paper, her fingers brushing the edges. She lifted it slowly, like it might break in her hands. For a few seconds, she stared at the notes on the page. Her hands moved to the keys, pressing one soft chord, the opening to the nocturne, but she stopped after only 3 notes. Her shoulders tensed. She quickly folded the sheet again and placed it in her bag. "I can't," she whispered. Marcus didn't push. He knew that trying to force her would only make her retreat further. "It's yours," he said simply. "Do what you think is right." She gave him a small, almost apologetic smile before turning back to the piano. She started another piece, one her father approved of, and filled the room with its polished, empty sound. Marcus stayed for a while, sweeping quietly, but his mind wasn't on the floor. He kept thinking about the way her fingers had hovered over the keys when she almost played Chopin. That hesitation wasn't weakness. It was proof that she still wanted to play it. Fear was still winning, but the fight had already started inside her. When she finished for the night, she gathered her things and headed for the door. As she passed him, she gave a small nod, like a silent thank you, though she didn't say the words. Marcus nodded back. After she left, Marcus walked to the piano. He sat on the bench and pressed a single note from the nocturne, letting it ring out into the emptiness. The sound was pure, lingering in the air before fading away. He imagined what it would be like if Emily could play it without fear, the way Clara once had, soft but powerful, each note carrying a piece of her heart. He stood and turned off the stage light, leaving the piano in the dark. As he locked up for the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen soon. Whether it would be good or bad, he didn't know, but he had given her the music, and now the choice was hers. At home, Marcus poured himself a glass of water and sat at the small kitchen table. The quiet of the apartment felt heavier than usual. He thought about Clara, about the way she had always encouraged people to play what they loved, no matter who told them not to. She used to say, "A song played with fear dies before the last note." He wondered what she would have done if she had been in his place. He didn't have to think hard. He knew she would have found a way to help Emily, no matter the risk. That thought settled something in his mind. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to make speeches or give big, heroic gestures, but he had been through enough in life to know when someone was being broken from the inside. And if there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was watching someone give up the one thing that made them feel alive. The next day, when he arrived at work, he noticed Emily walking through the lobby. She didn't see him, but she was carrying her music bag tightly, like she was guarding something precious inside it. He knew what it was, and deep down, he hoped that one day soon she would stop guarding it and start sharing it with the world again. That night, he decided he would be in the auditorium every time she was. He wouldn't interrupt, and he wouldn't pressure her. He would just be there, a silent witness, someone who saw her not as a CEO's daughter, but as a musician fighting to keep her music alive. Because sometimes you didn't win a battle by pushing forward. Sometimes you won it by simply refusing to walk away. Raymond Kessler was a man who loved control more than anything. In his mind, control was proof of power, and power was the only language worth speaking. Every deal he made, every event he hosted, every word he spoke was calculated to show the world that he could bend it to his will. That was why the idea for the charity gala had been so important to him. It was not just about raising money, it was about showing influence. The event would take place in the company's grand hall, a vast room with crystal chandeliers and gold-framed mirrors that reflected light from every corner. Guests would be some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city: politicians, investors, foreign dignitaries. Every detail had to be perfect, down to the last glass of champagne. And for the night's highlight, Raymond had planned something personal. His daughter Emily would perform live on stage. It wasn't about her talent. Raymond didn't care about music. It was about image, about showing the world that his daughter was elegant, obedient, and a reflection of his success. He had chosen the music she would play, pieces that were formal and impressive, but completely soulless. They would make her look skilled without revealing anything personal. Marcus heard about the event a week before it happened. He was in the staff lounge when one of the catering managers came in, reading from a clipboard. "Big night coming," she said. "The boss's daughter's performing. Guess she's doing some kind of classical showcase. All picked by him, of course." Marcus stayed silent, but his mind began to turn. A public performance meant Emily would be on display in front of hundreds of people, and more importantly, in front of her father. If there was any moment where she might take back her freedom through music, this could be it. But he also knew that Raymond would be watching her like a hawk, ready to crush any sign of disobedience. During rehearsal week, Marcus was assigned to clean backstage and handle equipment moving in the hall. It gave him a perfect excuse to be near Emily without drawing attention. The first time he saw her rehearsing for the event, she was sitting stiffly at the piano, surrounded by her father's assistants. They hovered like guards, making notes on clipboards, adjusting her posture, even commenting on her clothing. She played flawlessly, but Marcus could see that same dead look in her eyes. Every note was correct, but it was like listening to a recording. Perfect, but empty. Raymond sat in the front row, arms folded, nodding with approval. The assistants smiled whenever she followed instructions, frowning slightly if she made the smallest variation. After the assistants stepped away for a moment, Marcus passed by, pretending to sweep near the stage. He caught Emily's eye for a split second. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of recognition, as if she was relieved to see at least one familiar, safe face in the room. One evening, during a rehearsal break, Marcus overheard two event coordinators talking. The boss said no Chopin, absolutely none. He told the tech guys to double-check the sheet music before she goes on stage. Marcus felt a spark of defiance deep inside him. He didn't have a plan yet, but the thought of Raymond banning a piece of music, especially that nocturne, made his blood heat. By the night before the gala, the hall was nearly ready. The stage had been polished, the lighting tested, the rows of chairs lined up in perfect symmetry. Marcus was moving sound cables when Emily walked in for her final rehearsal. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that didn't come from physical work, but from carrying something heavy inside for too long. As she played through the assigned pieces, Marcus watched from the shadows. He noticed that her fingers sometimes lingered on certain notes, as if testing the possibility of something different. She didn't dare play the nocturne, but Marcus knew she was thinking about it. That night, after she left, Marcus stayed behind, staring at the piano in the empty hall. He thought about Clara again, about how she had played music as if her life depended on it. He thought about Emily's father, sitting in the audience tomorrow night, ready to take away that same light. And then he thought about the folded sheet of Chopin's Nocturne that he had seen Emily place in her bag weeks ago. An idea began to take shape in his mind, a risky, dangerous idea. If the wrong sheet music ended up on that piano when the spotlight hit, Emily might have no choice but to play it. It could be the moment she reclaimed her voice, or it could destroy her. But Marcus knew something important. Sometimes the right kind of risk could change everything. The day of the event, the grand hall transformed into a glittering world of wealth. Guests in suits and gowns arrived in sleek black cars. Photographers flashed cameras, and waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne. Marcus moved among them in his plain work uniform, unnoticed, carrying equipment and checking backstage setups. Emily arrived wearing a deep blue gown, her hair styled perfectly. She looked beautiful, but there was tension in her posture, her eyes scanning the room as if she was trapped. Raymond was close by, shaking hands with guests, every gesture smooth and calculated. As the evening moved toward the main performance, Marcus found himself backstage, close to the piano. He glanced around, no one was looking. The sheet music for the approved pieces was already on the stand. With steady hands, he slipped them out and replaced them with Chopin's Nocturne. He placed them neatly, as if they belonged there all along. Then he stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. He didn't know if Emily would play it or if she would freeze. All he knew was that the choice would be hers, but now, for the first time, she would have the chance. The grand hall was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Every seat in the audience was taken, the chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over the polished wood floors. The stage sat at the center, the grand piano gleaming under the spotlight. Emily stood in the wings, her hands cold despite the heat of the lights. She could see her father seated in the front row, perfectly composed, a faint smile on his face as he shook hands with a city councilman. Every now and then his eyes would flick toward the stage, checking that everything was in order. She took a deep breath and walked forward when her name was announced. The applause was polite and measured, exactly the way her father liked it, controlled and respectable. Emily moved toward the piano, her gown brushing softly against the floor. She sat down, adjusting the bench just as she had practiced in rehearsal. Then she looked at the sheet music. Her heart skipped a beat. The notes staring back at her were not the pieces she had been forced to memorize. It was Chopin's Nocturne, the same one she had been forbidden to play, the same one her father had threatened her over. She looked toward the wings and caught a faint movement in the shadows. Marcus, standing still with a broom in his hands, watching her closely. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away for long. She could feel her father's stare drilling into her from the front row. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The safe choice would be to stop, ask for the correct music, and play the pieces her father had chosen. That would keep the peace. That would keep her safe. But something deep inside her twisted at the thought. She thought about all the nights she had wanted to play this song the way it had been trapped inside her, smothered by fear. She thought about her mother, who had no idea her husband's control reached this far. She thought about the small act of kindness from Marcus, the man no one noticed, who had given her the sheet music back when no one else dared to. Her hands came down on the keys. The first notes floated into the air, soft and delicate. They filled the hall like the sound of water trickling over stones. The audience leaned in, drawn by the beauty of it. Emily felt her chest tighten, but not from fear, from release. Every note was a breath she hadn't been allowed to take before. In the front row, Raymond's smile froze. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He sat forward slightly, his fingers drumming against his knee. Emily didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the keys, letting her fingers move with a freedom she hadn't felt in weeks. The melody grew richer, the emotions pouring out with every phrase. Some guests closed their eyes, swaying slightly in their seats. Others turned to whisper to each other, clearly moved by the unexpected choice of music. Backstage, Marcus stood tall, gripping his broom like a staff. He knew what was coming. Raymond would not sit quietly for this. He watched as the CEO slowly rose from his seat, his tall frame casting a shadow over those seated behind him. Raymond began walking toward the stage, his steps slow but heavy, like a predator moving toward its prey. A few guests noticed and turned their heads, curious. Marcus stepped forward from the shadows, positioning himself between the side stairs of the stage and Raymond's path. When Raymond reached the edge of the stage, Marcus spoke in a low, steady voice only he could hear. "If you touch her, you'll have to go through me first." Raymond's eyes flicked toward him, cold and sharp. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he asked quietly. "I do," Marcus replied, his grip on the broom tightening, "and I don't care." The nearby guests, sensing tension, began to pay attention. A few phones appeared, recording the scene. Raymond glanced at the audience and seemed to realize the danger. Any outburst here could ruin his perfect image. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't step forward again. Emily, unaware of the exact exchange but sensing her father's presence had stopped moving, continued to play. Her fingers danced across the keys, the notes ringing out with a clarity and strength that surprised even her. The final measures came, each one softer than the last, until the last note hung in the air like a held breath. For a moment there was silence. Then the hall erupted into applause, loud and genuine, nothing like the polite clapping from before. People stood from their seats, giving her a standing ovation. Emily looked out at the crowd, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling quickly. She gave a small bow, her gaze brushing past her father without lingering. She caught Marcus's eyes in the wings and gave the faintest smile, a silent thank you. Raymond returned to his seat slowly, his face composed again, but his eyes hard as stone. Marcus stayed where he was until Emily stepped away from the piano and left the stage. Only then did he turn and walk back into the shadows, his heart pounding. The performance had changed something, not just for Emily, but for everyone who had seen it. For the first time, her father's control had been challenged in public. And for the first time, Emily had played her music not as a duty, but as her own voice. The applause was still echoing in the grand hall when Raymond's mask of charm finally cracked. As the guests clapped and cheered for Emily, his jaw tightened and his hand gripped the armrest of his seat until his knuckles turned white. He didn't hear the compliments from the people around him. He didn't see the admiring looks directed at his daughter. All he saw was defiance. His daughter doing exactly what he had forbidden her to do, and in front of the most important people in his world. Emily walked off stage, her chest rising and falling with every breath, her heart still beating fast from the performance. She didn't even notice her father moving toward the side of the stage, but Marcus did. From the shadows, he saw the way Raymond moved, controlled but tense, like a storm about to break. Marcus's instincts told him trouble was seconds away. Backstage, the atmosphere was different from the glowing energy in the audience. The assistants were frozen, unsure whether to congratulate Emily or step out of the way. Emily barely had time to put her sheet music back into her bag before Raymond appeared, his tall frame filling the doorway. His eyes locked onto her like a hawk spotting prey. "Emily," he said, his voice low but sharp, "we're leaving. Now." She froze, her fingers tightening on the handle of her bag. "I'm still—" "I said now," he cut in, his tone like a whip crack. Marcus stepped forward before Emily could take a single step toward him. He placed himself between them, his broom in his hands, the bristles resting lightly on the ground but ready to be lifted if needed. His expression was calm, but his stance was firm. "She's not leaving with you like this," Marcus said, his deep voice steady. Raymond's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You work for me. You clean my floors. Move." "I know exactly what I do," Marcus replied, "and tonight I'm making sure no one hurts her for playing a song." A small crowd began to gather behind them, stagecraft, even a few guests who had wandered backstage out of curiosity. Some already had their phones out, recording. The glow of camera lights reflected in Raymond's eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw him hesitate. Raymond took a slow breath, trying to control his expression. "You think this is about a song? This is about respect, discipline, family business." Marcus didn't move. "Family business doesn't include threats. I heard what you told her weeks ago." His voice stayed low but carried enough weight for everyone nearby to hear. "You said you'd kill her mother if she played Chopin again. That's not family. That's fear." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people looked from Raymond to Emily, their faces shocked. Raymond's control over the situation was slipping, and he knew it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "You just signed your own resignation. I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Marcus leaned in just enough to meet his glare. Some things are worth more than a job. The tension between them was so sharp that everyone in the room seemed to stop breathing. Emily's eyes darted between the two men, her mind racing. For so long, she had been silent, afraid to challenge her father. But now, seeing Marcus stand there without fear, something inside her shifted. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough for the whole backstage area to hear. "I'm not going with you tonight, Dad." Raymond's eyes widened slightly, the shock breaking through his anger. "Emily." "I'm staying here," she continued, "with people who don't try to control me, with people who don't threaten me." Her voice grew steadier with every word. "If you want to talk to me, you can do it without threats. Otherwise, I have nothing to say to you." The silence that followed was heavy. Raymond looked around and saw every eye on him. The cameras were still recording. Any move he made now would be broadcast, whispered about, replayed. Slowly, he straightened his suit jacket, forcing his expression back into a cold, polite smile. "Very well," he said quietly. "Enjoy your freedom." The way he said the last word made it sound like both a warning and a curse. Without another glance at Marcus or Emily, he turned and walked out, the sound of his polished shoes fading into the distance. When he was gone, Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands were still shaking, but she stood tall. Marcus stayed beside her, his broom still in hand, but his grip had loosened. "You didn't have to do that for me," she said softly. Marcus shook his head. "Yeah, I did. Someone had to." Emily's eyes glistened, but she smiled, small at first, then wider. "Thank you," she whispered. The crew and staff around them began to murmur, some patting Marcus on the back, others giving Emily supportive nods. It was clear that what had happened tonight would spread quickly through the building, maybe even the whole city. People had seen the CEO challenged, and not just by anyone, but by the man who was supposed to be invisible in his world, the janitor. Marcus didn't care about the attention. All he cared about was that Emily had stood her ground. That moment, more than the music, was what truly broke her father's hold on her. And as they walked out of the backstage area together, Marcus knew this wasn't the end of the story. Raymond Kessler wasn't the type of man to accept defeat easily. But for now, Emily was safe, and that was enough. The story of the performance spread through the city faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, videos from the gala had already been shared thousands of times online. People could see the moment Emily started playing Chopin, the close-up of her father's frozen smile, and the short but clear footage of Marcus stepping between them backstage. The clips were replayed on news channels, posted on social media, and discussed in cafes and offices. Marcus didn't own a smartphone, so he didn't see most of it at first. But when he walked into work that day, the way people looked at him was different. The same employees who had once passed him without a second glance now greeted him with nods or whispered to each other as he walked by. A young receptionist even stopped him to say, "I saw what you did. That was brave." Emily didn't come into the building that day. Marcus suspected her father had told her to stay home, maybe to avoid the media attention. But later in the afternoon, he found a small envelope in his locker with his name written on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note from Emily. It read, "You gave me my music back. I'll never forget it." Under the words was a small drawing of piano keys with a heart in the center. Marcus tucked the note into his shirt pocket and carried it with him for the rest of the day. By evening, the tension in the company had grown. Everyone knew Raymond was furious, but no one knew what he would do. He was a man who valued reputation above all else, and now that his private cruelty had been made public, he had to choose between punishing those involved or pretending it had never happened. When Marcus was finishing his shift, a senior manager came into the janitor's room. The man looked uncomfortable, holding a file in his hands. "Marcus, the CEO wants to see you," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. He knew this conversation had been coming. Raymond's office was on the top floor with huge glass windows overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. Raymond stood behind his desk, his hands resting on the polished surface. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "Sit," he said. Marcus remained standing. "I'll stand." Raymond's lips tightened, but he didn't push it. "You embarrassed me in front of important people. You made me look weak." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "No, you made yourself look weak. I just didn't let you hurt her." A flicker of anger flashed across Raymond's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Do you understand that I could end your career? No one will hire you if I say the word." "I've worked hard all my life," Marcus replied. "If I have to start over, I will, but at least I'll be able to look in the mirror." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Raymond leaned back in his chair. "Leave. Don't come back to this building. Your final pay will be sent to you." Marcus expected as much. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Raymond added, "Stay away from my daughter." Marcus paused but didn't answer. He simply walked out. That could have been the end of it, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. News articles began framing Marcus as the janitor who stood up to a billionaire, and public opinion was on his side. Anonymous sources from the company started sharing details about Raymond's controlling behavior, and soon the pressure on him grew. A week later, Emily contacted Marcus through a mutual friend from the building. They met in a small, quiet cafe far from the city center. She wore casual clothes and no makeup, looking freer than he had ever seen her. "I'm leaving my father's house," she told him. "I've been accepted to a music academy overseas. I'm finally going to play what I want." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's good. You should." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice soft. "I don't think you realize what that night meant to me. It wasn't just about the music. It was about having someone believe I had the right to be myself." Marcus shrugged. "You already had that right. You just needed to take it." They talked for an hour, sharing stories, laughing a little. When they left, she hugged him tightly. "I'll send you a ticket to my first concert," she promised, "no matter where it is." Months passed. Marcus found another job, this time at a community arts center where music students practiced daily. It was quieter work, but it felt closer to something that mattered. Every now and then, he would hear someone practicing Chopin in one of the rooms, and it would bring back the memory of that night, the risk, the tension, and the moment Emily took control of her own life. Then, One spring afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a plane ticket and a simple card. First concert. You promised. Marcus smiled as he held it. It wasn't often in life that you saw the result of standing up for someone, but now he would. He folded the ticket back into the envelope, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't just kept Emily safe that night, he had given her something that would last the rest of her life. And as he looked out the window at the setting sun, Marcus thought of Clara, his late wife, and the music she had loved. Somewhere he hoped she would be proud.